Tax has been in the news recently, hasn't it? Again, hard on the heels of the NIC increases, a tax in all but name. What we have now is the realisation and awareness that everybody has of the incredible tax bounty available to all non-DOMs, which is a bit of a shame for the Everton striker, the Deputy Prime Minister and the ex-Chief of Staff of Boris Johnson, because they're all called Dominic and they can't access those wonderful benefits. No, what I'm really talking about is not non-Dominics, but non-domiciles. Was that a joke? I'll leave that to you, actually. So non-domicile, what do they get? What are the tax benefits that they get? Why is everyone so wound up about this? Well, before we get to that, and we'll get to that actually in a separate video, you've got to consider or remind yourself of just what non-domicile status is and what the conditions are. The rules in relation to determining domicile status are quite complex, really, as are the rules for determining resident status, except the residence determination rules are largely pretty much enshrined in legislation. That's not so much the case for domicile. The concept of domicile and being UK domiciled implies a much more sort of resilient status than being residents. It's sort of more long-term. There are three main categories, and not the only three, but the three main categories of domicile in the UK are your domicile of origin, the domicile you get when you're born basically, domicile of choice, the domicile you get when you change your mind basically, and domicile, or basically deemed domicile. That is more a legislative construct. That's where the legislation comes in. And in all of these circumstances, case law, common law plays a very, very strong part. So just let's have a look at these three definitions and what they mean to see that you can apply them in any case where a client asks, am I UK domiciled or not? Or what are the rules if a professional connection asks you as to what the rules of domicile are to categorise an individual as UK domiciled or not. Let's look first of all at domicile of origin. You acquire your domicile of origin on birth, and pretty much for most people it's going to be the domicile of, you'd think, their parents, and yes it is, but it's the male parent. So for most people it'll be the domicile of origin will be that of their father, which they keep until they're age 16, and maybe beyond that, but they can then make the choice to change that domicile. There will clearly be some circumstances where having the domicile of your father isn't appropriate or relevant because the father's not around, or just you can't identify them, in which case the domicile will be that of the mother. All of the relatively complex conditions around the definition of domicile are contained in much detail within Techlink. So your domicile of origin you acquire at birth, and for most people it will be that of their father. Domicile of choice, how do you change your domicile? Two things you need to do to change your domicile of origin, and that is to pitch up in another country, actually be physically present in another country, and this is the most important point I think, actually not, it's equally important, have a permanent intention to reside there. And that's where so much of the case law has come from, because it's very subjective and we're looking at evidence. What denotes a permanent intention to be in a new country? It's obvious if you're physically present there, but what denotes a permanent intention? So many factors contribute to it. Case law, actually very, very interesting. You know, of course, having a residence in that new place, being there most of the time, sometimes even having a burial plot. You know, all this kind of stuff is relevant, but there's no one determinant. Being, you know, if you get the status of being just a national of that country, that also helps, but it's looked at in the round, and different factors will have different relevance in different cases. So again, Techlink, lots more detail on the many interesting cases on what it takes to acquire a new domicile of choice. Okay, then there's the deemed domicile provisions that have been introduced. Well, they've been around for a while, but they've been changed relatively recently. So what are these rules of deemed domicile? Well, they were looked at and changed in April 2017. And I'm going to refer to my notes here because there are two main ways to be deemed domicile. They're not the only ways, but the two main ways. Number one, if you were born in the UK, have UK as your domicile of origin, and you are resident in the UK. Number two, you have been resident in the UK for 15 out of 20 years. So even if you haven't acquired a UK domicile of choice under the common law by showing a permanent intention to reside there, because you have a permanent intention to go back somewhere else to your domicile of origin. Most recently, that's been discussed in relation to going back to live in India. So you've been resident despite that intention to go back to your domicile, your home of origin. You have been resident for 15 out of 20 years immediately before the relevant tax year, the one we're looking at, where your domicile is going to be relevant. So they're the two main conditions, much more complexity around those and conditions around that, especially as to how you lose your domicile of choice, your new domicile of choice, and how you lose your deemed domicile. All of that detail is contained in much more detail in Techlink, and it deserves a read if this is a subject that you are interested in.